October 1961, Hollywood, California. Batjack Productions, room 114. The desk was not glamorous. Scratched oak, 3 drawers that stuck in the heat, a surface stained by 20 years of coffee cups and script margins. The kind of desk a working man uses, not a star's prop, not a showpiece. And at that desk, on a Tuesday morning in the middle of a week that was supposed to be unremarkable, John Wayne sat alone with a piece of paper in his hands and could not put it down. This was unusual. Wayne read fast. Scripts, telegrams, contracts, legal briefs. He moved through paper the way he moved through a set, efficiently, without ceremony. His secretary, Margaret, had worked alongside him for 19 years. She knew his rhythms the way a sailor knows the weather, and she had never once seen him read the same page 3 times. He read it a 3rd time. Then he set it flat on the desk. Smoothed it once with the flat of his palm, slowly, carefully, the way you press a map open when you need to see every road at once. The letter was written on plain white prison stationery. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. The penmanship of a man who did not want to waste the paper. Every word earned. The return address on the envelope read, Huntsville Unit, Texas Department of Corrections. Margaret had almost moved it to the legal pile. She almost didn't give it to him at all. She would spend the rest of her life grateful that she did. Wayne reached for the telephone. He looked at nothing while he waited for the operator. Then 4 words, spoken quietly, without drama, the way a man speaks when he has already made up his mind before his mouth opens. Get me the warden. Nobody in the room asked which warden. Nobody asked why. Because John Wayne did not make calls like that for show. He made them because something had reached through all the noise of being famous and grabbed something private, something no director had ever filmed, no journalist had ever found, and no audience had ever paid a nickel to see. And whatever it was sitting right there on that scratched oak desk, folded in thirds, stamped with a prison seal, written by a man America had forgotten. If you've ever received a message that stopped you completely, that reached past every wall you'd built and hit something unguarded, then you already understand what happened in that room. Stay with this story, because what John Wayne does next, no studio approved, no publicist knew about, and no reporter found out until the man himself was already in the ground. The bell doesn't ring for 9 days. Then it rings once. And the man who walks through the door changes everything, including John Wayne. To understand what was written on those pages, you have to go back 9 years. Back to a town that never made the news, to a man who never wanted it to, and to one night in October that rewrote everything. Beaumont, Texas, 1952. Robert Callaway was 31 years old and had the kind of life that doesn't get written about, which is another way of saying he had built something real. He came back from Korea in the spring of 1951 with both legs, most of his hearing, and a silence in him that men who hadn't gone overseas sometimes mistook for coldness. It wasn't coldness. It was the particular quiet of a man who had seen enough noise to last 3 lifetimes and decided to spend whatever came next carefully. He worked the ranches east of Beaumont, showed up before the foreman asked, left after the work was done, kept his boots cleaned even on days he had no reason to, saved the last quarter of every paycheck in a coffee tin, not for anything specific, just because a man who saves something believes there's a future worth saving for. He had never been arrested, never been in a courtroom, never given anyone a single reason to doubt him. On the night of October 14th, 1952, a filling station on the south end of Beaumont was robbed at gunpoint. $340 taken. The attendant gave a description within the hour. Large man, military posture, dark coat. 2 days later, Robert Callaway was pulled off a job site in handcuffs. He had been 12 miles away, at a friend's farm, helping with a horse that wasn't going to survive the week. The friend was 73 and hard of hearing. The witnesses were scattered. His public defender was 26 years old and buried under 40 other cases. The trial lasted 3 days. Callaway took the stand and told the truth plainly, without drama, without performance, which meant the jury decided it didn't sound real enough to believe. 22 years. The cell door closed on a Tuesday morning on a man who had never done a dishonest thing in his life. But somewhere in the second year, something kept him from going under. Something that flickered once a month on a white sheet strung between two posts in the yard. He never told the guards about it. But by the third year, he was trading cigarette rations for something most men in Huntsville didn't bother with. Paper, a pen, and one address memorized from a movie poster seen through a fence. He wrote it across 3 nights, not because he was being dramatic. Robert Callaway had watched enough men perform in Huntsville, for parole boards, for chaplains, for visitors across scratched glass, to know exactly what performed emotion looked like and how little it ever got anyone. He refused to do that here. If John Wayne ever read this letter, it would be honest, or it would be nothing. Those were the only 2 options a man with 1 sheet of paper and no second chances could afford. The first night he wrote and threw away. The second night he stopped, not because the words were wrong, but because they weren't yet true enough. On the third night, past 2 in the morning when the block had gone quiet and the only sound was old concrete settling, he found it. He did not ask for money, did not ask for legal help, did not ask for anything at all, and that clean refusal to want something from the man was exactly what separated his envelope from the other 200 Margaret sorted that Tuesday morning. He wrote about career. One night in the winter of 1951, when the cold came in so hard and the position collapsed so completely that 3 men in his unit simply stopped. Not retreated, stopped, as if the body had quietly decided the math no longer worked. Callaway didn't stop. He still didn't know why. He wrote that he still didn't know why, 8 years later, sitting in a Texas prison for something he didn't do. He wrote about the film screenings in the yard, the white sheet between 2 posts, the way Wayne's characters stood their ground when standing their ground made no logical sense, without a speech, without needing the moment witnessed to make it real. Then he wrote the sentence that stopped John Wayne cold. You always play a man who stays when everyone else runs. I've been trying to be that man in here for 8 years. Some days the Duke is the only reason I make it to morning. He sealed the envelope before he could take it back, handed it to the mail slot on a Wednesday and waited, not with hope exactly, but with the stillness of a man who has said the true thing and knows the rest is no longer his to control. Margaret's hand paused on the envelope. She felt the weight, not the paperweight, the other kind. She set it beneath the script Wayne was reviewing and said nothing. Wayne found it mid-afternoon, read it once fast, then slow, then a third time, his face perfectly still. The people around him knew that stillness was not blankness, it was the opposite. If you have ever held on to something, a film, a song, a voice through a radio in a dark room, when everything else was gone, you already know what Callaway was trying to say. Stay with this story, because what John Wayne does next, no publicist approved and no studio knew about, and it cost him nothing and everything. Wayne folded the letter, did not file it, did not pass it to legal. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest, and wore it there for 3 days. On the 4th day he made 2 calls, first to his attorney, second to his driver. When his assistant asked where he was going, Wayne picked up his hat and said 5 words nobody in that office understood until weeks later. I'm going to pay a debt. November 3rd, 1961, Huntsville, Texas, 9:14 in the morning. A single black car pulled up to the main gate and stopped. No motorcade, no press, no advance call to the warden's office. 1 car, 1 driver, 1 passenger who stepped out into the flat Texas morning wearing a dark civilian jacket, plain trousers, and no hat, because he had not come here as John Wayne the movie star. He had come as a man who owed something to someone and had driven 400 miles to begin paying it back. The gate guard stepped out of his booth and stopped walking. He would tell his wife about this moment that same evening, and every anniversary after, for the rest of his life. Warden Leonard Davies, a methodical man who had run this unit for 11 years without once walking to the front gate for anyone, came outside in his shirt sleeves and stood in the gravel and looked. Wayne met his eyes, did not smile. "I'm not here as an actor. I received a letter from one of your men, and I owe him a conversation. I'm asking for 4 hours." Davies started to explain procedure. Wayne let him finish without interrupting, without pressing, without using his name like a door being forced open. Then, quietly, "I've been to Iwo Jima and Korea, at least on film. I think I can manage the visitation room." Davies approved it within the minute. Nobody told Callaway. He was called to the visitation room with no explanation, which in Huntsville always meant bad news. He pushed through the door expecting his attorney. He stopped so completely, the guard behind him almost walked into his back. Across the glass, John Wayne stood up, all 6'4" of him, in a plain jacket. Looking at Callaway directly, without performance, without the managed expression of a public figure handling a situation. Callaway's legs didn't work correctly for a moment. Wayne said simply, "You wrote me something real. I thought I'd come and say it back." They sat across from each other for 4 hours. Dale Whitfield, a 29-year-old guard from Abilene who had grown up watching Wayne's films with his father, said years later he had never witnessed two men speak with that quality of honesty. No performance on either side, no gap between what was being said and what was being meant. Wayne talked about the distance between playing a man who doesn't break and actually being one. He told Callaway, "The Duke is a character I put on in the morning. What you've been doing in here, staying upright in a place designed to put you on the ground, that's not acting. That's the real thing. And the real thing is always harder." With 40 minutes remaining, Wayne placed a manila folder on the counter between them. 3 pages of legal notes, 2 witnesses never called at trial, a timeline discrepancy nobody had caught since 1952. Callaway looked up. "Why?" Wayne's answer came quietly. "Because the man in that letter doesn't belong in here, and I'm not willing to drive back to California knowing I could have done something and didn't." The session ended at 1:22 p.m. Wayne stood slowly. Callaway pressed his hand flat against the glass. Wayne raised his and held it on the other side. Whitfield looked at the floor, not out of protocol, but because the moment felt too private to witness. Wayne walked out into the November morning and got into the car. His driver looked in the rearview mirror and asked how it went. Wayne looked at the gate closing behind them. "Drive," he said, nothing else. Because what he had just set in motion had nothing to do with a conversation, and everything to do with what comes after one. And what came after was going to take 3 quiet years that nobody in Hollywood would ever know about. He never called a press conference, never mentioned Robert Callaway's name to a single reporter, never allowed his attorneys to put his name on the legal brief they filed. Only theirs appeared on the paperwork, clean and anonymous, exactly the way he wanted it. When a journalist in Dallas caught the edge of something in 1962 and called Batjack Productions, Margaret told him Mr. Wayne was unavailable. She wasn't lying. Wayne had been specific. "If his name appears in a newspaper, the whole thing becomes about me. That's not what this is. That's not what he needs." So it stayed quiet. 3 years of silence that cost Wayne nothing publicly and everything privately. The phone calls, the attorney fees, the monthly updates he read alone at his desk before anyone else arrived. Inside Huntsville, word moved the way it always does in closed places, sideways, without announcement, through looks and silences, and the particular shift in atmosphere that happens when something extraordinary has touched ordinary ground. John Wayne had come here, sat in the visitation room, not for a photograph, not for a headline, for one man with a letter written on prison stationery. Callaway didn't speak about it. He didn't need to. But something changed in the block after November 3rd, something no report could measure but every guard and inmate felt. Men who had stopped writing letters home started writing again. Dale Whitfield, the guard from Abilene, said later, "I don't know exactly what happened in that room, but the wing was different after. Quieter in the right way." In 1963, two new witnesses came forward. A woman who had seen the actual robbery and identified someone else entirely. A store receipt from the farm 12 miles away, dated October 14, 1952, bearing Callaway's name, never entered into evidence, sitting untouched in a county records office for 11 years. The appeals court accepted the case. August 1964. Wayne was on location in Arizona, dust on his boots and a cavalry script in his hand, when his secretary reached him by telephone. The appeal had been upheld. The conviction was overturned. Robert Callaway was a free man. Wayne asked one question. "Is he okay?" She said yes. He said, "Good." Then he walked back to the set and went to work. He did not go to the courthouse. He did not send flowers. He let the man have his first free morning, unshared, unclaimed, and entirely his own. He never took credit, never told the story. For 15 years almost no one knew, and then John Wayne died, and the man he quietly set free finally broke his silence. June 1979. Wayne was buried at Pacific View Memorial Park on a Thursday afternoon. 3 weeks later, a 58-year-old man in Beaumont, Texas, picked up a telephone and called a local newspaper. He had made himself one promise. He would not tell this story while Wayne was alive to be made uncomfortable by the telling. He had 2 letters on the table in front of him, and the second one, the one Wayne had written back, contained a final paragraph that no one in America had ever read. The reporter who took the call was expecting a human interest piece, a feel-good story for a slow news week, something warm and simple he could turn around before Friday. He was not prepared for what Robert Callaway placed on the table. 2 letters, side by side. The first written on plain prison stationery in September 1961, careful handwriting, every word deliberate, the penmanship of a man who understood he might not get a second sheet. The second written on Batjack Productions letterhead, dated November 7, 1961, 4 days after the Huntsville visit, in a hand the reporter recognized immediately because half of America would have recognized it. Broad strokes, unhurried. The handwriting of a man who wrote the way he talked, without decoration, without performance, without a single word placed there to impress anyone. Callaway read it aloud. Wayne's letter described their conversation the way a man describes something he wants to remember accurately, specifically, without sentiment layered over the facts. He wrote about the distance between the character the world paid to watch and the man who drove home afterward. He wrote that Callaway's letter had found something in him that most things didn't reach anymore, not because it flattered him, but because it refused to. He wrote that honest men in impossible situations were rarer than any role he had ever been asked to play, and that he had spent 30 years pretending to be one on screen without fully understanding what it actually cost. The final paragraph was 3 sentences. Callaway's voice held for the first 2. The last one broke him. The reporter printed it verbatim. The story ran in 34 newspapers within a week. It was read aloud on the floor of the Texas State Senate. A pastor in Montana read it from his pulpit on a Sunday morning. Copies were folded into wallets and tucked into Bibles across the American West by people who had never met either man and never would. The reporter looked at Callaway across the table and asked the only question left. "Why did you wait? Why hold this for 15 years? Callaway looked at the 2 letters lying side by side, the prison stationery and the Batjack letterhead, and when he answered, it was the quietest thing he said in the entire interview. And somehow, it was the loudest. Robert Callaway answered the reporter's question without looking up from the letters. "Because," he said, "he didn't do it to be known for it. He drove 400 miles and spent 3 years and never once put his name where anyone could see it. Because this wasn't about him. It was about doing the right thing when nobody was watching and nobody was ever going to know. I wasn't going to take that away from him by making it a story while he was still alive to be embarrassed by it. He gave me my life back. The least I could do was protect his privacy for the rest of his. The reporter didn't print that part immediately. He sat with it for 2 days first. Robert Callaway lived as a free man until 1993. He never sought compensation from the state of Texas. He never wrote a memoir. He gave exactly 2 interviews in his entire life, both about Wayne, never about himself. He worked the ranches east of Beaumont until his hands wouldn't let him anymore. He kept his boots cleaned. He saved the last quarter of every paycheck. Some men are exactly who they were before the world tried to break them. That is not a small thing. That is everything. And somewhere in a filing box in Newport Beach, there is a piece of plain prison stationery that John Wayne kept until the day he died. He never framed it, never showed it. He just kept it. That was always the whole story. If this reached you today, pass it to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, because the men history forgot deserve to be remembered, and there are more stories like this one waiting to be told.